We have stopped at the first rest stop on our way to the Columbia River to fish for shad. And I've never fished for shad before, so this is something new for me. I've never fished at the Columbia River at all. It's a river that divides Washington from Oregon, so it's been a bit of a drive so far, and I've still got a bit of a drive to go, but I think we might be about halfway there. And along the way, I'm planning to stop at a Sportsman's Warehouse to look for the right lure for shad. And it's not really a lure, I guess. It's more like a jig head, a colored jig head. So I hope they have what I have in mind. Other than that, the weather's really nice today. It's sunny but not too hot, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this goes today. So we just got here. It took probably like 4 hours plus to get here, but it's really nice. It's pretty. I have never been here before, like I alluded to earlier. But so I guess I'll try and get started fishing now.
It looks like a tarpon. Looks like a little baby tarpon. Maybe I should bleed him. That's the closest thing to a tarpon I've ever caught. I always wanted to go tarpon fishing. Now I see the appeal. They bite really, really well for their size. Nice shad, Daisy do. big one. It's worked, but not as good as the Shad trips. We need to stop at the store and get some water or ice. It's got little spots down inside, like here and here, here. Kind of pretty. All right, here is our first specimen on my very ugly fish fillet table that I welded up. And yeah, you'll notice there's a nice little hump here in the weld table because I didn't take my time and weld it properly, and so now it's a little warped in the middle panel. But you know, when you're learning how to weld, and it was like many teens of years ago, I think, if I remember rightly, you make mistakes when you're learning, but I still like my fish fillet table. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna fillet this sucker out. I have no clue what I'm doing. This is my first shad, but I'm gonna do it kind of like a salmon. Start up here, come around the fin there. These scales are really hard. Very thick. Way thicker than a salmon scale. Okay, I'm going to come down and try to cut that vent out, or that fin out, because we don't want that. Pull that off there. There's one fillet. Man, I'm making a mess, it looks like, but it's actually going pretty well. Especially considering this is the first shad I've done. Don't ever cut towards yourself, Chris. Okay, now this really cool guy down there said there was a way to just kind of feel these bones out with his finger. But I think I'm just going to cut them. Oh wow, these skins are a little thinner than I thought they would be from this side. They don't hold up like a cod skin, that's for sure. Try to get a better hold on that, and you know, instead of trying to butcher it, let's try to go from this side. Probably should have practiced a couple of them before trying to make a video on it. These skins do not want to come off. I can see why people scale them. Oh man, bummer. Well, it was going better. If this was like a trout or a salmon, I would have just filleted that right off, no problem. But these things are a little different shape too. They're kind of chunkier in the middle, so they don't lay as flat. I can make excuses all day long.
That skin looks really thin.
Yeah, it's weird. It's really weird.
Really stuck to the flesh, looks like.
Yeah, like this is a cod that would be off in like 5 seconds. But this is really on there. This is going to take some practice. And I might just end up scaling these like a lot of the guys were doing on the bank, which I can kind of see why they were doing that now, but I really wanted to get the skin off because I've heard these things are really strong in flavor. And I was trying to make the flavor as clean as I could. But we'll just say that I'm a terrible filleter, and that way I'm not making terrible excuses for myself, because I can do that all day long. And I guess we'll catch you back on the other side of it. When we've got a couple more of these down, maybe we'll do a follow-up on the fillet job. Alright, so I poked around with the fillet job. Yeah, just leave the pin bones in there. You might take the ones out of the center, that might help you. I'm going to do that. Beyond that, there's another set of like 4 more rows of pin bones besides the one in the center. So there's literally like 5 set rows of pin bones in these suckers. You just got to cook them and eat around them. Like I said, don't waste your time trying to fillet the skins off. The skins on here are too paper thin. Instead, we're just going to come through and just take the scales right off of these things. Scales on these things are huge. Just huge. Like, that's almost the size of my pinky. That is the size of my pinky nail. That is a huge stinking scale. Like, look at that. That's the size of my pinky nail. That's a big old scale. Anyways, just bring your knife backwards against the scales. They seem to come up pretty easy. And now I understand why the guys on the bank were descaling their fish right there on the river. This is a dirty, dirty job, and it would have been better if we'd just done this at the river. But live and learn, this is the first time we did it. Kind of interesting how you can see all the little spots coming out on the fish as you fillet it. They're really a pretty little fish. Fun fact is they weren't even native to the Columbia River system. They're actually from the East Coast. When they planted them in there, I think it was well, it was a long time ago. Let's just leave it at that. Like a very long time ago. And didn't they say it was like the 1820 or 1920s that they did that or something like that?
So this is from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. Some history of the shad. It says, shad have a colorful history. Long before being imported to the Pacific side of the country, they were getting a name for themselves. As far back as the Revolutionary War, they helped the cause of the future United States. After suffering through a tough winter, General Washington's undernourished troops at Valley Forge welcomed the bounty of a large shad run on the Delaware River. The volunteers filled out their diet with smoked shad. The historic story of interest to Washington anglers, however, is when shad were introduced into the Sacramento River in 1871. The transplanted shad thrived and soon traveled to more northerly waters. But even before shad fry were deliberately planted in the Columbia River drainage system in 1885, some of the original immigrant population strayed north from California and homed in on the Columbia River. Shad may have been caught as early as 1876, and the U.S. Fish Commissioner records document that mature shad were taken from the Columbia in 1880. And then it says, like salmon and steelhead, shad are anadromous. What? How do you say that?
Anadromous.
Okay. They enter freshwater rivers in the spring to spawn. Unlike Pacific salmon, they do not necessarily die after spawning. Many shad continue to spawn annually. And shad measure up to 30 inches in length and weigh up to 12 pounds, but usually measure up to 20 inches and weigh about 5 or 6 pounds. Females are larger than males.
That would be why we seem to keep getting the boys. I don't see any 30 inches in here, and they've been all males so far. Alright, of course we need to wash it off, but that is a descaled, filleted out shad fillet. And like I said, it's been very tasty from what I've had of it so far. Some guys are putting it in a crock pot and cooking it with some tomato juice, tomato sauce. Some guys are smoking it. I think I'm going to want to try that. I also really want to try the slow cooker as well. So I was trying to fillet this big shad here, one of our bigger ones, and it was saying in what the Daisy was reading about shad that the bigger ones are usually female, and this big one, well, it's a female. And apparently the eggs are supposed to be very, very good eating, so maybe we should try eating some of those. So we shall save those and set them aside, and I don't know how in the world you're supposed to eat those, but I guess we're going to have to look that up. And if these were salmon eggs, man, that'd make some good fish bait, but I don't know. It might be better to eat these.
They're tiny, aren't they?
Yeah, very tiny. I can see why they're so prolific, seeing how many thousands and millions of eggs are in there.
It is the day after the shad fishing trip at the Columbia River, and I guess I'll just tell you how I thought it went. Overall, I think it went very well. I didn't know what to expect going in, so when I committed to a 4-hour drive to the Columbia River, I was sort of wondering if this was going to be worth it. Like I was mentally preparing for getting there and potentially not catching anything. So the fact that we did catch as many as we did and had a good time, it went well overall. At first, I was having some issues, and that doesn't really have anything to do with like anything other than me. When I first got there, I was feeling already kind of tired because of the long drive. And then it was warm down there, warmer than I expected. It was probably in the mid-80s. That was a little bit tiring for me. And the drive was tiring. But anyway, so we got there. We walked from the parking area through this short trail through the woods, and then ended up at the shore, the shore or the bank of the Columbia River. And it was really pretty there. I could see the dam and some mountains, and just the whole environment there was quite pretty. And there were a lot of other fishermen there and fisherwomen, but not so much that it was really impacting having some personal space to fish in while you were standing along the shore of the river. But at first it did. So when I first got there, I was starting to get rigged up, and then someone else arrived and kind of started fishing kind of close to where I was. and it felt like I didn't have room. On top of that, I'm not accustomed to fishing in a river where there's this current. Like, I'm used to fishing at a lake. So this was kind of new to me. So then I didn't know what I was doing at first until I got some instruction several times. But so I was having a hard time with... I felt like I was either in the way of the person next to me or they were in my way. Like I would cast a little bit upstream and then have the current carry my lure and such downstream, and then when it reached a certain point downstream I'd start to reel it in. But so there was this person to my left just upstream of me. They might have been 10 feet away, but then I felt like I had to time my cast with their cast. Like, so they'd cast and then their line, you know, and their weight and lure and stuff would drift in front of me. So then I felt awkward casting over their line to cast upstream. So then I'd wait. At first I'd wait until they were starting to reel in before I casted. But then I did not really like that. I like some freedom in when I cast instead of having to like fit in my casts between someone else's stuff that's happening with them. So that that's what happened at first. And that was one of the things that bothered me. Another thing that bothered me at first, and this all that I'm about to say happened in about the first 5 minutes that I was there. So I encountered that. I also encountered the fact that I didn't know what I was doing. I got some instruction and I followed it, but I didn't really understand the process, so I felt out of my element a little bit. I didn't know exactly why I was doing what I was doing. I understood later. I got the picture later, but this was my first experience with this type of fishing like this, so yes, at first I didn't know what I was doing, but okay, so I was dealing with that and feeling uncomfortable because I didn't know what I was doing, and the whole entire environment was new to me, so it wasn't exactly comfortable at first. And then I'd get snagged a lot. Like in the first 5 minutes, I think I got snagged on someone else's line twice. I got snagged on some rocks. I got snagged on some plants. As Chris was helping me get unsnagged, I was holding his fishing rod and line with the lure attached to the end of his line, and then I got snagged. I snagged myself in my back. And then what else happened? Okay, so then I moved a little bit away from the person next to me. I skipped around another person and went like one person down to my right, so now I had more room, which I liked much better. That made that part easier. And I was still trying to get the hang of things. And, so then I caught a fish, the first fish that I caught. And that was fun. That happened really quick. Again, this was all happening in the first 5 minutes that I was there, approximately. So, by the way, I thought the shad fought very well. It was fun to catch them. So I caught the first one, and I got it in. I pulled it up on the shore, and I thought they were quite pretty. They're really shiny. I don't know if that came across on camera, but they're really quite iridescent and pretty, I thought. Okay, so I got it on the bank. And it's flipping around on the bank, and I want to get the hook out of its mouth. But it's flipping around, so I went to grab it with my hand, my bare hand, which was a mistake that I learned that was a mistake very quickly, because I did not know that there is this row of sharp scales or spines or something. There's a row of them along the belly of the shad fish. So I sliced my finger on this fish, and it was really gross because I could feel the sharp fish slicing through my flesh. It was not a good sensation. I knew right away what was happening, and then the blood, and everything. That immediately put me into a different mood, because I don't like hurting myself. I really don't like cutting myself on anything or on any part of my body, but probably especially my hands and fingers, because I use those daily. You know, I cut myself, and I'm trying not to be dramatic, but on top of everything else that was happening in the first 5 minutes I was there, that put me over the edge a little bit. And like as soon as it happened, I thought it made me upset, because I thought of the healing time. It didn't hurt that much, which I was grateful for, but I thought of the time it would take to heal, and then, you know, all the things I do with my hands, playing the piano, washing the dishes, washing my hands. I thought of all the things that this is going to be a pain to deal with over time as it heals. So that made me upset. I was more upset than in pain. Like I think what made me upset about that also is because before that even happened, I thought I should have brought my gloves. And that's like the only thing I forgot to bring, my gloves, because when I've gone fishing before at the lake, I've cut myself before on fish. I've cut myself before on trout, of all things. And I don't like cutting myself on my fingers, so I used to bring gloves with me, but I forgot them for this trip, because I had taken them out of my tackle box to use for some other purpose. But yeah, okay, so then I cut myself, and I mean, I washed off the blood in the river water, but I kept fishing because, I mean, that's what we were kind of there for, but it was awkward. Now I was in a different mood. I wondered, I thought, was this worth coming here for? Was this worth the trip? Because I've also done this before. I've realized this about myself. I think of an idea, something to do, and I'm typically the one to initiate something to do, like some little adventure or project or something along those lines. Like I'm the one thinking of it and initiating that, oh, we should go do that. But then when I start to do the thing, I'm thinking, why did I think of this? Why did I initiate this? But so I had a slight meltdown there after I cut myself open, but and I think I shed a couple tears. I think I actually shed a couple tears, not out of pain, but just sheer frustration that I did that to myself on a fish. But so I took a break. I sat on one of the rocks on the shore and just took like 2 minutes to try to gather myself. And I was encouraged by Chris to keep fishing. So after my break, I continued fishing, and it got better from there as I was catching fish. It was fast paced. I was not used to catching fish so quickly. I'm used to going to the lake and waiting and waiting and waiting for a bite. But not this time. This was very rapid. Catching the shad was happening very quickly. And that was different for me. I kind of liked that. It was not so boring. And like I said, they fought well. I used this, I think it's called a shad dart. And in this like lime green, bright green chartreuse color, and that's what was working the best between the two of us. Chris was trying a pink color. It didn't seem to work as well. Let's see. The fishermen next to us were very friendly and nice and gave us advice about how to cook the shad and how to fillet it or clean it, and yeah, they were very nice. As you might have seen earlier in the video, we ended up catching a total of 21. There is no limit on shad, and so that was also a nice thing, to think that you can catch as many as you want and you're not limited. It made the feeling of fishing for them a little bit different. Felt more free, like you had more freedom. And not just in regard to fishing, but I realized the other day that I really like the feeling of freedom. So, yeah, I think we fished for 3 to 4 hours and then made our way back home. We got home at about 9:30 or so at night, and Chris began filleting the fish, cleaning them. I only jumped in later and filleted and cleaned maybe 4 or 5 of them. So he did the majority of the cleaning, but that was like a marathon of fish cleaning, because he pretty much started when we got home, and then I jumped in later, and we got done with the cleaning of the 21 fish at like 3 a.m., 3 in the morning, and that was pretty tiring. And then this morning we had a morning music practice at church. So overall, I'm feeling a little bit tired today, but in the end, it was enjoyable. I had a rough start with the fishing part of it, but it got better, and I did enjoy myself, and I do think it was worth going there and experiencing this. We did cook a little bit of the shad last night to try it and taste it. I thought it tasted fine. Somewhere I feel like I heard that it might not taste very good, but I thought it tasted fine. The color of the flesh of the fish was white, and it was rather tender and soft, even when cooked. So to me it tasted good. It tasted fine. It tasted kind of mild, not overly fishy in a negative way. If there's any negative about the shad as far as eating goes, the only negative that I see personally is how many bones are in the flesh. Some of the bones were filleted out, but there's still some smaller bones remaining in the flesh of the fish. And so you kind of have to be pretty patient when you're eating it, if you want to pick out all these small bones. So there's quite a few small bones. That was the only negative that I saw. Perhaps you could think of a way to cook the fish so that these small bones would either soften or sort of disintegrate or become so crunchy, perhaps, if you fried the fish, that you could get by with just eating the small bones. But other than that, I thought the taste of the fish was fine. Yes, so overall, I'm glad I went. I had a good time. I did like catching as many fish as I did. I don't think I have ever fished before and caught so many fish in one fishing trip. So that was fun. I thought it was fun. There seemed to be more catching than fishing. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like at least 50% of the time that I would cast, I would catch something. So that percentage is something I haven't experienced before. In the past, if I had to think of some percentage of catching to cast ratio, it'd probably be like 10% or less. The drive to and from the Columbia River was fairly easy. We did not encounter traffic, which I was grateful for. About halfway home, maybe 3/4 of the way home, my car started having a problem where it would want to pull to the left a little bit, and also the steering wheel was shaking, and the ride was a little wobbly or shaky, and I thought it might be a tire problem, because a long time ago I drove a car and felt sort of similar sensations, but maybe less. And I ended up pulling over and checking the tire, and yes, it was starting to come apart. So this situation reminded me of that past experience, so I thought there might be a problem with the tire. So we pulled over. I looked at the two front tires. It felt like it was one of the front tires, not a rear tire. I looked at the front tires, but I didn't see anything wrong with them. So we soldiered on, and we got home safely. This morning, when I drove to music practice at church, I realized that the problem was still there, and it was worse. Like, driving to the Columbia River, I felt no problem at all. No shakiness, nothing. And like I said, on the way home, I noticed there was a problem. And then this morning, when I drove to music practice, I definitely noticed there was a problem. So I let my dad try driving it and see what he thought. Like, was he gonna think it was a tire issue, like I thought, or another problem that I thought it might be was something with the alignment, because it was pulling to the left. But I thought the fact that it pulled to the left could also mean there was an issue with the tire. Anyway, my dad thought it was a tire issue as well. So we ended up taking it to this place that changes tires, and yeah, they found that the front driver's side tire was starting to come apart. So I'm grateful and thankful to the Lord that we got home safely, because it was on its last leg, and so I have new tires now. So one other thing about fishing for shad, something that we encountered is the loss of gear. Like I said, I was getting snagged and caught on things fairly often. Might have been my fault. Like later I adjusted how fast I was reeling in so as to try to avoid being snagged. So it might have been partially my fault, if not entirely my fault. But so we lost several weights and several shad heads. So I guess my point with this is that bringing extra gear is probably a good idea. And another thing, I talked about my difficulties in the first 5 minutes that I was there. I forgot about another difficulty that I was having that added to the whole thing, was that I got a tooth pulled at the dentist's. Yesterday, it was 3 days ago. Today's the 4th day. And the day after I got my tooth pulled and the second day after I got my tooth pulled, I really had no pain. But yesterday, the 3rd day, I had pain. So that was another thing I was dealing with the whole time, is pain in my mouth. And tolerable, but still quite unpleasant. I would say 4 or 5 out of 10. A pain level of 4 or 5 out of 10. So yeah, that with all my other little difficulties in the first 5 minutes I was there kind of put me over the edge a little bit. But even though I was put over the edge a little bit and shed 2 tears, I can say that I put blood, sweat, and tears into this trip. I can say that, literally. But in the end, I don't want to paint it negatively. That was just my little personal troubles in the beginning of this trip. That was just my little personal troubles at the beginning of this trip. But other than that, like if I take that out of the picture, it was a successful trip. And even with that in the picture, I'm glad I went. I had a good time. I think it was a lot of fun. It was not boring. It was, like I said, fast-paced and active, and the location was very pretty. I had a good time. And I thought it was sort of interesting that when one of the fishermen to my right, he was packing up and starting to leave, and he walked by me and let me know that when I'm cleaning the fish, to be careful about the sharp scales along the bottom belly of the fish, because they'll cut you. And that he told me that when he cleans the fish, he wears a metal glove, but that any glove will work to protect yourself. And I thought, yeah, I kind of learned that firsthand, but I was grateful for his advice and his kind advice. And actually, when he told me that the sharp scales or spines were running along the belly of the fish, I didn't know that at the time. I know I cut myself on the fish, but I didn't exactly know where on the fish was so sharp to cut me like that. So he educated me on the sharp scales on the belly of the fish. And actually, I thought that was sort of odd an odd placement for sharp scales or spines on a fish, because I know that some fish have sharp spines like in their fins or something like that, but I haven't really come across a fish that had a little row of sharp scales running along the length of their belly, like in a little line like that. So that's something I learned about shad.
Plug this in, that way we don't get any of the stinky, awful lighter fluid. Ew. Yeah, I like the electric heater. And then I hand welded this thing up and put all my wood chips in here. And when that gets going, I can set this directly on top of the charcoal. It's got a little vent on the side where all the smoke can billow out. And then we'll set it in here and we'll smoke the shad up. We got flames. It looks like a smoker's lung. Well, I guess we can add more fish and actually pack it in there, but it doesn't look great. I just hope it tastes great. It looks kind of scary. It doesn't smell bad. It actually smells pretty decent. I guess we'll try that. Oh, it looks like it's baked cardboard, but it's actually really juicy. It's actually quite good, and no bones. That's pretty decent. I think we'll go ahead and continue on. It just looks ugly and scary. But that's Probably just because I canned it or smoked it first. But that's actually really good. So, in summary, we did another batch of pressure cooked shad, and we've learned a few things. One, the smoked shad came out really good. We really liked it. But some of the instructions said not to pack the jars, and as you saw from the first video, it just kind of melted down to where there wasn't as much in the jars as there should have been. So we learned to actually pack the jars all the way up, leaving about an inch of head space. So go ahead when you can them, pack them in there tight. We also went ahead and we tried non-smoked shad, just putting them straight in there and packing them in nice and tight. That looks like it's going to taste really good. We haven't tried it yet, but it looks really, really good. We also tried putting one in there that we didn't even fillet. We just chopped it up, and we'll see how that tastes, see if it dissolves the main bigger bones. If it does, great. If it doesn't, that wouldn't be too many big bones to pull through. In summary, we've learned a lot. I think the next time we pressure cook, we're going to try to get the propane stove that I have for cooking crab and putting that outside and pressure cooking outside so we don't have to listen to that awful, awful rattling that you guys saw in the video. I mean, 2 hours of listening to that rattle was about enough to rattle your brains. So we'll probably try to transfer that outside, and we learned a much faster way of cleaning shad. Don't need to remove the pin bones, just clean it like you would a salmon. Take the scales off, leave the skin on, and throw it in a jar, or smoke it and throw it in a jar. Canning it seems to be the best way to go about eating the shad, unless you are a professional filleter. So that's our takeaway. I'm sure Daisy will have something to say a little bit later, but that seems to sum it up for the moment till I learn something more.
Some of my final thoughts on the shad fishing thing are that I had a good time. I think one good thing to know ahead of time is to figure out what you plan to do with all the shad that you catch so that nothing's wasted, because it's one thing to go fishing and come home with, I don't know, 2, 3 to 5 fish. You can kind of figure out what to do with them pretty easily, but when you come home with a quantity, you should probably know how to approach preserving it, and that's not something we went into this knowing what to do, like knowing what we were going to do with all the fish. But I am happy to say that none was wasted. We ended up canning the majority of the fish, and I really think that's the way to go with shad, because when they were pressure canned, when the jars of shad were pressure canned for almost 2 hours, it took care of all the small bones. In one of the jars, we experimented with cutting up one fish with the spine still in it and then canning that. And then we tried that, and even with the spine in it, it wasn't a problem. The bones just became so soft that you could eat them and hardly notice really that they were there at all. So that I thought that was a very good way to use the shad, so that when you're eating it, you're not constantly picking out small bones. Furthermore, I think that would be a good way to preserve it as well, so you don't have to eat a bunch of shad all at once. Obviously, when it's canned, you can eat it when you want to. Some of the shad that we canned was smoked, and some of it was just packed into the jars, not smoked, and packed into the jars raw. I had not canned fish before, and I didn't realize how easy it was. If you don't want to go through the longer process of smoking it first and then canning it, Apparently you can take raw shad or raw fish, put it directly in your hot canning jars, add some salt and vinegar, maybe some spices, and then put your lid on and then pressure can it. I thought maybe you had to add oil or water to it because like the tuna fish that I buy at the store, it's like packed in water or oil. But no, I guess when you can fish at home, you don't have to add water or oil. And then, yeah, after you do that and can it for like basically 2 hours, that's it. So I kind of liked that. I suppose you could freeze your shad, but then you're still dealing with the bones. So I think canning it is the way to go, so you don't have to deal with the bones, most of all. And the taste of the fish canned was still really good. I preferred it over tuna fish. I think you could use it like a person would use canned tuna. So overall, I feel like shad is a bit underrated as far as a fish to eat. And I think I might be wrong, but I think that's mainly because of all the small bones in it. It really is a pain if you don't learn how to fillet all the small bones out. It really is a pain to eat it fresh, or if you don't know how to cook it in such a way that the bones disintegrate, which is why I thought that the canning process, which eliminated the problem of the small bones, was the way to go. I think you could use the canned shad like you would tuna fish, but for me, I don't mind eating it plain, like out of the jar. It didn't bother me. It was really good. The smoked shad canned, it was very good as well. It just seemed like something you would use more as an hors d'oeuvre or a snack of some kind, not something that seems like it would be a meal, as much as the plain canned shad could be. Would I go shad fishing again? Yes. At this time, I would, because it was a fun experience. It was fun to catch so many fish so rapidly. But there was a moment in the canning process where I thought that, well, there were a couple moments. There was a moment during the canning process where after listening to the little weight or whatever it is, the little weight on top of the pressure canner, after hearing that thing rattle for 2 hours, it was so loud and unpleasant that after 2 evenings of 2 hours of that per evening, of having to listen to that, I thought I would not go fishing for shad again just to avoid 2 hours of that noise. And then there was another point where I thought maybe I wouldn't go shad fishing again, where I realized how many small bones were in this fish, where it seemed very difficult to enjoy. Like the flavor of the fish was very good, but it was, for me, very difficult to enjoy eating it when there were so many small bones in it. At that point, I thought, well, what's the point of fishing for this fish that's so difficult to eat? But that problem was eliminated in my mind when I realized that the canning process took care of the small bones. So now that I know there's a way to preserve and or cook the shad in such a way where the bones aren't a problem, and then my other issue of having to listen to the weight on top of the pressure canner make noise for so long, that problem I think could be remedied by canning outside. not inside. If it was outside, I could go inside and not have to listen to it. It was really painful, a painful noise to listen to that long. But so those two problems in my mind are fixed. So yes, I would go shad fishing again. And really, I think it's a good way to acquire some food. When you can catch so many so easily and know of a way of preserving them, I think it's a good option for acquiring some food. So I think that's about all that I have to say about the whole shad fishing trip. I did enjoy it. It was a long drive, but if I were up for a long drive again, I really have no reason for not going shad fishing again. It was fun. I think the most fun was catching the fish. It is some work to deal with your catch after the fact. But really, that one jar that we canned, where basically all that was done to the fish was scaling it and gutting it, removing the head and fins, and then chopping it and packing it in a jar to be pressure canned, that was about, I think, the least amount of effort that you could put into it and have a good product in the end. That was about the least amount of effort. Smoking it before canning it, or even filleting it and smoking it and canning it, that's kind of a lot of labor for what you get out of it. So personally, I would recommend just canning it plain, not smoking it first, unless you want something special. But yeah, those are about I think that's about my final thoughts on the shad fishing thing. And now I will try to get into talking a little bit about some observations I made in regard to how all of this could relate to the Lord and this Christian life. So if that's not your thing, this would be the time to stop watching, because I will get into talking about the Christian life and God, and how I thought some aspects of this fishing trip related to that. So I guess the main theme of my observations of how the fishing trip, and not just the fishing trip, but working through processing the fish, the theme of my observations is the church body. How the church body was intended to function, versus it being mainly one person in a church service who functions. How, according to what I read in the Bible, it seems as if God intended that it would be more than one person, one part of the body of God's church body, of which he is the head, that he meant for more than one part to be functioning. Just like the human body has many parts, which are all useful and needed. That's the theme of my observations. And actually, it seems to be the theme of more than one of my other videos. So I don't know what that means, other than perhaps God is trying to communicate how important the proper functioning of his church body is. And so one of my observations was that throughout the trip and the processing of the fish, I noticed that I had strong points and weak points, and Chris also had strong points and weak points. However, together it made things go better. And I correlate that to the church body, where if it was only one person as the main functioning part, it's just not as good as if there are, I'll just say, several functioning parts. I was gonna say ideally all the parts are functioning, but even let's just say several parts of the church body are functioning, that's better than one. That's better than one, because the one has strong points, thank God for that, but they have weak points too. And not always weak points that are like intentionally weak or some sort of major flaw in the person. They just might not see what other parts of the body see. And so it benefits when there's more than one part functioning. Just like it benefited when it wasn't just me on this trip, it benefited the whole experience. Or that it wasn't just Chris on this trip, that when there's more than one person that are functioning in some way, adding their strong points to the situation, it helps. It really helps. And I just think about how the church body, let's just say, currently is in a typical American church, and how much better it could be if more parts were able to function. And I think some parts can function, are ready to function, and other parts are not mature yet and aren't really sure how they can add to when the church is gathered together. I think sometimes the parts that are ready to function can be prevented from doing so by certain formalities and traditions in the church. The tradition is that one person is the main guy and everyone else comes to listen. I think that's unfortunate, but because of that tradition, it prevents the other parts from really functioning when we're gathered together. Unless, like I said in a different video that I already made, unless you catch people after church is over or before it begins. Or outside of church services altogether. I guess I won't go into that part much further, but for instance, on this trip, I suppose one of my stronger points was that I was the one who initiated it to begin with. I was the one to say, let's go do this. But then, so let's just say that's a strong point of mine. Okay, I was the one who got motivated enough to say, let's go do this. Let's go fish for shad. Let's try this. But then, shortly after I got there, some things happened that made me very discouraged that I think I went over already previously in this video. But at that point, I was feeling very discouraged and I felt like, why did I even come here to do this? And I was ready to stop. I was ready to stop, say that this was a failure and go home. But so that I can say that was a weak point. I was easily discouraged. But Chris's strong point was to encourage me to keep fishing. So after repeated encouragements by him to keep fishing, I did keep fishing. And strange thing, I outfished him, which is rare. But okay, so there's a few things here. If it wasn't for, there's a few things here. If I wasn't a part of the equation, probably this fishing trip wouldn't have happened. If Chris wasn't part of the equation, I probably would have stopped about 5 minutes after I got there. Another example is a simple one, but descriptive, and it's that I drove there and Chris drove back. I think that's a very easy and simple example of when there are more than one person participating, it eases the burden on the others. And I have thought of this in regard to pastors. They're usually the main guy that preaches every Sunday. And I thought, I'm impressed that they are not burned out. I'm impressed that they're not burned out when the load is mainly on them to perform. And I say perform, but really they should be following the Lord and just obeying what God has them do. But still, I think that when the church gathers together, more than one part should function. But then I've mentioned that already. So it's just an example of when more than one is functioning, it's better. It eases the burden on others. Let's see. Oh yeah, another strong point of Chris's and my weak point. Not necessarily a weak point, I would say just a lack of knowledge. I didn't know how to rig up my fishing rod for fishing for shad. I did not know how to rig it up at all with the weight and how much leader and all of this. I did not know how to do that, but he did, so I let him do it. Now I know, but at the time I didn't. So, I mean, that's another example of someone else knowing something that I didn't. Someone else knowing something that I didn't. And I know for sure that that is the case with more than just how to rig up my fishing pole. That is the case spiritually as well. I have my part. I am one part of the church body, and by God's grace, He has taught me certain things that I share in these videos. That is what I see and know and have been taught, and that's what I have to give. But it is by no means everything. It is by no means the whole picture. One person wasn't, one part of the church body isn't meant to be the whole thing. That is just my part. But I mean, what are other people's parts? That things that they know that I don't know. That's why it's important to have just more than one part. I want to know what other people have learned from God that I don't know, so that I can learn from them and be edified by that and grow from that and mature from that. But if I never hear from them, how will I know what they know? How will I be taught by them if I never hear from them? Do you know what I mean? In most church environments that I have been in, there's not a lot of opportunity to hear from others what the Lord has taught them. I have a lot of opportunity to hear from the pastor what the Lord has taught him, which is good and which I appreciate, but I just realize there's so many other people there There's so many other parts of the body there that I never get to hear from in a spiritual way. Maybe it's because they don't, I don't know. I don't know why I don't. I mean, I hear a thing or two in passing in the Bible studies. But as for the structure of the traditional church environment, it's not really a time to hear from anyone else. It's a time to hear from the one person. And like I said, according to what I've read in the Bible, it's not the intention, God's intention. That's not God's intention of what should happen when the church is gathered together. And if you think that that would be a bad thing in a fishing trip, for me to not know how to rig up my fishing rod because of a lack of knowledge, I think a correlating situation in the church body of certain body parts of the church body not knowing something can be even more important. The knowledge needed from other parts of the body can be very much more important than the information I needed from Chris to know how my fishing rod should be rigged up. I hope I'm making sense. I think the lack of knowledge that can happen in a spiritual way is much more important than the lack of knowledge that I had in regard to rigging up my fishing rod. I repositioned myself because that was getting uncomfortable. Yes, repeatedly throughout the fishing trip and the processing of the fish at home, I saw the importance of there being more than one person involved. Not just so one person didn't have to do all the work, but in other ways too. In ways, like I mentioned, where one doesn't have the knowledge, the other one does, and how that was beneficial overall. Like driving down to the Columbia River, directions was helpful to have someone be more in charge of the directions while I was the one driving. To just have two perspectives as to where we should go. I mean, the Columbia River is pretty long. We ended up going closer to the Bonneville Dam, but I mean, we could have stopped sooner along the way and fished from the shore. Just the input. Is there a saying about that two minds are better than one, or am I mixing that up? Two minds are better than one. Maybe I'm mixing that up with some other cliche, but it illustrated to me yet again the importance of the church body. Repeatedly, I saw that. During the processing of the fish, Chris did do the great majority of the filleting of the fish and the cleaning of the fish. However, when it was nearing 3 a.m., I could see how many fish were left, so I jumped in and helped with the cleaning of the fish and scaling the fish and filleting the fish. So again, there's at least a little bit of support of the workload. I know that Chris tends to not want to travel very far from home, and I can understand that, but like I said, I was the one to initiate doing this, and so I'm trying to think of how that could be correlated to the church body. I guess vision. Maybe someone has vision of what can happen if people move out of their comfort zones, and something good can happen. It's not always a scary thing, or something scary that'll turn out bad. It's not always that way when trying something new. And I already mentioned this, but I said I got so discouraged when we first got to the Columbia River that I was ready to stop. And again, in the church body, yeah, there are definitely times where a Christian can be so discouraged that they're ready to stop. They're ready to stop, but others can come alongside and encourage them to keep going. And I do not think that I can emphasize how important that is. That when you are extremely discouraged, that someone is there to encourage you. And the part where I mentioned that I outfished Chris, in other words, I caught more fish than him, which was unusual, but that was a result of his, in part, it was a result of his encouraging me to keep fishing. And I think that can often happen in the church body as well, where let's say you see someone who's discouraged and you have enough strength by God's grace to encourage them. Let's say you're the one that's in a better place and you can encourage them. Sometimes that makes a difference and they go on to do things that you didn't do. They go on to somehow produce in ways that you didn't, but you helped that to happen. You helped that to happen. And I'm not trying to say that you made it happen. It's God who made something good happen through a person, but and it's not something you need to be jealous of. It's just you can be happy that God used you to encourage someone like in that way, and that it had good fruit as a result. So yes, I really could go on into more detail. Like even during the canning process, ideas would be sort of bounced off of each other a little bit. Chris was the person in charge of the canning, but occasionally he would ask me my opinion on something, and I would give my opinion, but a lot of times I realized it didn't really come off as just my opinion. It was something that he was thinking of anyway. So what it came off as was just an affirmation of something he thought anyway. And again, in the church body, sometimes it's not some huge new revelation that you're giving someone. It's just affirmation that they're on the right track. So as I said, this seems to be a bit of a running theme in several of my videos, the full functioning of the church body, which is comprised of many parts and not one part. And like I said, I don't know what to make of that other than perhaps God is trying to communicate how important this is, the more full functioning of the entire church body. When I have seen that happen more, when I have seen more parts of the church body function, it is probably one of the most beautiful things I have seen. To see the Lord able to move through his body and it be more than one thumb moving or one hand moving. Do you know what I mean? To see him move through his church body, it's really quite a beautiful thing and rare to see. I guess if I want to state it more plainly, what I see so often in traditional church environments is a binding of the body, of the church body, bound by tradition, bound by man-made tradition. You could picture a person, a human body, tied up with maybe, one hand free to move around. That's what man-made traditions do to the church. And not just man-made traditions, but other things too, all kinds of other things like fear, or wanting to please people over God. Anyway, not to end on a negative note, but this fishing trip and the subsequent processing of the shad did provide to me many illustrations of how beneficial it is when more than one part of the church body is functioning, and not just how beneficial it is, but how kind of vital it is at times. And it made me take it even more seriously. Like, I saw the importance of at least 2 people being involved in a fishing trip, let alone the importance of all the parts in the church functioning for the edification of the church. That's pretty important. That's more important than a fishing trip going well. Do you know what I mean? So, yes, I guess if there's a takeaway, a spiritual takeaway from this video, it's that the functioning of the parts of the body of the church, not just one part, is very important.